Johnny Football.
Johnny Football.
Johnny Football. Johnny Football.
They called him Johnny Football, a nickname that once felt untouchable, bigger than the game, louder than reason. For a moment, he wasn't just a player, he was a phenomenon. Every Saturday became a show, every throw another highlight, every celebration another headline. But behind the cheers, there was always a shadow, a voice whispering that no one flies this high without falling. Because for every legend that rises overnight, there's a price waiting at sunrise. Johnny Manziel didn't just chase greatness, he sprinted toward it, grinning, reckless, unstoppable. The crowds wanted magic, and he gave them chaos that looked like it. He turned broken plays into miracles, taunts into touchdowns, and stadiums into stages. And yet, for all the noise and fame, there was something fragile underneath, a kid trying to outrun the weight of his own myth. They sold him as a hero. They painted him as a villain. But the truth was always somewhere in between. Because Johnny Manziel's story isn't just about football. It's about what happens when a young man becomes a brand before he becomes himself. And once the world calls you Johnny Football, there's no easy way to go back to being Johnny Manziel. Before the fame, before the cameras and the chaos, there was a kid from a small Texas town called Kerrville. Population barely above 20,000, where football isn't a pastime, it's a religion. And in that quiet corner of hill country, a restless kid named Johnny Manziel spent his days turning backyards into stadiums. He was small, too small, they said, too wild, too undisciplined. But the thing about Johnny Manziel, he didn't play football the way coaches drew it. He played it the way kids dream it. Spin out of pressure, sprint the opposite direction, flick the ball across the field like it was nothing. It wasn't polished, it wasn't pretty. It was chaos, and it worked. At Tivy High School, word spread fast. Crowds started showing up just to see what impossible thing he'd do next. One play, he'd break 3 tackles. The next, he'd throw off his back foot 40 yards downfield. It didn't matter if the defense was perfect. Johnny would still find a way to make it his game. But recruiters weren't sure what to make of him. Too short for a quarterback. Too reckless for a system. Texas A&M took the gamble no one else wanted to take. And in 2011, when he arrived on campus, he wasn't there to fit in. He was there to take over. Coaches saw flashes in practice. The improvisation, the confidence, the spark that couldn't be taught. Teammates said he talked like he'd already won something. Even before his first start, Johnny carried himself like a show everyone else was just lucky to watch. No one knew it yet, but college football was about to change. And in a few short months, the name Johnny Football would become a movement. When Johnny stepped onto the field at Texas A&M, he wasn't just another freshman. He was an anomaly, a 6-foot improviser with the instincts of a street magician and the swagger of someone who hadn't yet learned what fear was. The Aggies had just joined the SEC, the toughest conference in college football, and nobody expected much. A&M was supposed to be the new kid on the block, the easy win, the warm-up game for Alabama and LSU. But then Johnny Football happened. From his very first start, you could feel it, the electricity. He scrambled out of sacks that should have buried him, reversed direction like a backyard kid refusing to lose, and threw touchdowns that made defenses look like they were chasing ghosts. He didn't just beat you, he embarrassed you, and the crowd fed on it, that chaos, that rebellion. Every time he took off running, it was like the stadium itself held its breath. Then came November 10th, 2012, Tuscaloosa, Alabama, #1 ranked Crimson Tide, Nick Saban's empire. No one beats Alabama at home. No freshman walks in there and wins. But Johnny didn't care. That afternoon, he made one of the greatest defenses in college football history look helpless. He ducked under pressure, spun left, lost his balance, caught his own fumble midair, reset, and found a receiver in the end zone. The play didn't just break Alabama's coverage, and it broke the internet. By the time the final whistle blew, Texas A&M had shocked the world. Johnny had 345 total yards, 2 touchdowns, and a lifetime of highlight reels in one afternoon. In a single game, he went from that freshman QB to a national sensation. Johnny Football was born. Every Saturday became a show. The scrambles, the celebrations, the money sign. He played football like it was performance art. Cocky, creative, untouchable. Broadcasters called him college football's rock star. ESPN couldn't get enough. Social media made him a meme, a myth, a movement. Every kid wanted to play like him. Every defense dreaded facing him. And then, the Heisman. No freshman had ever won it before until him. He stood there in a suit, hands shaking, accepting the most prestigious award in college football history. He wasn't even old enough to buy a drink. Reporters wrote headlines like "The Legend of Johnny Football" and "The Freshman Who Changed Everything." For a moment, he wasn't just a player, he was a phenomenon. But behind the grin and the bravado, something else was happening. Johnny had become bigger than the game itself. He couldn't walk across campus without being mobbed. He couldn't go to a restaurant without phones flashing in his face. Autographs, interviews, sponsorship rumors, even fake scandals, all before his 20th birthday. Everyone wanted a piece of him, and for the first time in his life, the thing that made him unstoppable, that wild energy, that recklessness, was starting to turn against him. Because when the whole world starts cheering your name, it's easy to forget who you are beneath the noise. And Johnny Manziel was about to learn what happens when the spotlight never turns off. After the Heisman, Johnny Manziel stopped being a college quarterback and became a celebrity. Everywhere he went, airports, bars, restaurants, someone wanted a photo. The small-town kid from Kerrville had become a global headline. Every touchdown touchdown was followed by a handshake deal. Every mistake by a camera flash. He was no longer just Johnny Manziel. He was Johnny Football, the brand. And like most brands born overnight, it started to eat the person alive. The offseason became a blur. Vegas trips, Drake concerts, TMZ videos. One weekend he'd be on a beach in Cabo, the next he'd be courtside at an NBA game. There was always someone filming, always someone ready to post. The same charisma that made him magnetic on the field made him irresistible off it. Fans saw the money sign and laughed. Coaches saw it and winced. Texas A&M tried to reel him in, but how do you discipline a phenomenon? He was on magazine covers before class, flying private jets before practice. For a while, it looked like he was untouchable. College football's rock star quarterback, untamed and unapologetic. But then came the warning signs. Autograph sessions for cash, sideline arguments, rumors that the fame was getting in the way of the work. Teammates started whispering. Coaches started tightening curfews. Johnny brushed it all off, smiling for the cameras, but behind the grin was exhaustion. He'd built a character so loud that the real him couldn't breathe anymore. During one interview, a reporter asked, "Do you think you've changed since the Heisman?" He laughed. "I mean, wouldn't you?" The thing was, he wasn't wrong. How do you stay normal when the world calls you a legend at 19? How do you stay grounded when the same people cheering you on Saturday are dissecting your mistakes on Sunday? For a while, Johnny kept it together. The flashes of brilliance were still there. The no-look passes, the impossible scrambles, the jaw-dropping comebacks. But something had shifted. He wasn't playing to win anymore. He was performing to maintain the myth. By the time he declared for the NFL draft, the world was split. Half the country still believed in the magic. The other half was waiting for him to crash. The scouts called him a risk. Too small, too reckless, too Hollywood. But the headlines didn't care. They called him the next big thing. And when the Cleveland Browns drafted him in the first round, fans went wild. Flashbulbs exploded. Jerseys sold out overnight. The show was moving to the biggest stage in football. But the truth was, Johnny Football hadn't just arrived in the NFL. He'd arrived at the beginning of the end. The NFL was supposed to be Johnny Manziel's rebirth, the moment the myth became real. Draft night looked like the start of a movie. Cameras flashing, fans chanting, and Johnny sitting there in a perfectly tailored suit, grinning ear to ear. He flashed the famous money sign one last time for the crowd. Cleveland had their savior. The city that hadn't had a real hero in decades finally had something to believe in. But the NFL isn't college. There are no underdogs, no soft secondaries, no broken plays turning into miracles. In the SEC, Johnny was the storm. In the NFL, he was a rookie quarterback facing veterans who had been through every kind of storm there was. Cleveland threw him into chaos, a broken franchise, a revolving door of coaches, and a fan base desperate for something, anything to hold on to. It was a setup built for pressure, not patience. His first practices raised red flag. He wasn't studying enough film. He was showing up late. Reporters started leaking stories of nights out, of teammates questioning his focus. But the city didn't care. They just wanted the magic back. They wanted Johnny Football to save them. Then came his first start. December 14th, 2014, against the Cincinnati Bengals. The crowd was electric, cameras everywhere, the story already written. And then, disaster. 2 interceptions, 0 touchdowns, and a blowout loss that left the stadium silent. The highlight reel hero looked lost. The college superstar had vanished. After the game, his face said it all. Frustration, confusion, disbelief. The headlines turned fast. Johnny bust. Overrated. More fame than focus. He brushed it off. Told reporters he'd bounce back. But inside the building, his coaches were losing faith. By the end of the season, the team benched him. And when the offseason came, instead of training, Johnny disappeared into the nightlife again. Clubs in Miami, bottle service in Vegas. Every time someone posted a video, it trended. The same energy that once made him untouchable was now making him uncoachable. By his second year, the Browns were done pretending. The reports got worse. Missed practices, lies about his whereabouts, anger behind closed doors. He'd show up to meetings unprepared, sometimes still hungover. That fire, that backyard brilliance that once defined him, it was gone. And the thing about fame is, it never leaves quietly. When it turns on you, it burns everything down. By 2016, the Browns released him. No trade, no second chance, no tears. The legend of Johnny Football had officially collapsed, from Heisman winner to out of the league in less than 3 years. But what came next wasn't just the fall of an athlete. It was the unraveling of a person who'd built his identity around being untouchable. Once the headlines stopped saying Johnny Football, they started saying something else. Johnny Manziel, out of control. He wasn't a quarterback anymore. He was a spectacle. Every few days, a new clip surfaced. Drunk in public, fighting in clubs, caught on camera looking like a ghost of himself. The face that once lit up stadiums now looked hollow under flashing lights. He'd become addicted to attention in the same way others get addicted to painkillers. It filled the silence until it didn't. Without football, the fame became poison, and without discipline, the poison became his lifestyle. The reports grew darker. He stopped showing up to team facilities. He disappeared for days without answering calls. Friends said they didn't know where he was, or who he was anymore. He crashed a car in a late-night accident and laughed it off. He threw parties during the season. His agent dropped him. His sponsors followed. Even his own team stopped defending him publicly. Then came the police reports. Domestic disputes, reckless behavior, substance abuse. The NFL didn't even bother suspending him. They just forgot him. And in a league that moves faster than forgiveness, being forgotten is worse than being hated. For a while, Johnny tried to pretend it didn't matter. He told himself he'd make a comeback. He posted workout videos, talked about locking in, but everyone could see it. The spark was gone. He wasn't training to win. He was training to feel relevant again. Then came the truth. Depression, self-destruction, a complete loss of identity. He later admitted he'd been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, but for years refused to accept it. He said in interviews that he was self-medicating just to feel something. The parties, the chaos, the noise, they were all distractions from the silence that followed the fame. His family tried to intervene. Old teammates reached out. Even former coaches sent messages. But Johnny didn't want help because to him, help felt like admitting that Johnny Football, the unstoppable, untouchable legend, was dead. He drifted from team to team, trying to rebuild his name. The CFL, the AAF, semi-pro leagues, no one watched. Each comeback lasted a little shorter than the one before. Every pass he threw looked like a shadow of the kid from Kerrville. The confidence that once electrified crowds now looked like defiance. And the crowds weren't chanting anymore. They were watching quietly, a tragedy playing out in real time. For the first time in his life, Johnny Manziel had no game to play. No cameras, no noise, just silence. And that silence hit harder than any linebacker ever could. When the cameras finally went dark, Johnny Manziel was left alone with the one person he'd avoided his entire life, himself. No more crowds, no chant, no headlines, just silence and the weight of everything he'd lost. He was back in Texas, the same state where it all began, but this time, there were no reporters waiting at his door. Just long days, longer nights, and a mirror he couldn't look away from. For years, he'd been chasing the high of attention. Now he had to learn to live without it. In the Netflix documentary Untold Johnny Football, he spoke about that time like a man waking up from a dream. He admitted to planning his own downfall. He said after the Browns cut him, he'd spent millions of dollars in a single year, knowing he didn't care if it all ended. When asked why, his voice cracked. He said, "I didn't want to live anymore." That line hit like a punch to the chest, because for the first time, you could see it wasn't just about football. It was about identity. For his entire life, he'd been Johnny Football, but now that name didn't mean anything. And Johnny Manziel, the person beneath it, didn't know who he was supposed to be. He tried to come back, again and again. The CFL, the AAF, the FCF, every league that would give him a uniform. But it was never really about the game anymore. It was about proving to himself that there was still something left worth saving. The results didn't matter. The touchdowns didn't matter. The act was over. What mattered was the reflection, the acceptance that maybe his story wasn't about greatness anymore, but about survival. He started talking about mental health, about how he ignored everyone who tried to help him, how fame made him invincible until it made him invisible. And for the first time, he stopped talking like a brand and started talking like a person. His dad once said in an interview, "I don't know if I'll bury him before I die or not." That was the kind of fear that surrounded Johnny's name for years. Not whether he'd win another game, but whether he'd make it to tomorrow. And yet, somehow he's still here. No longer the Heisman winner, no longer the NFL star, just Johnny, alive, quiet, and finally learning to exist without applause. For most players, football ends when the clock runs out. For Johnny Manziel, the hardest game started after the final whistle. He spent years chasing something that didn't exist, a version of himself that could only live under stadium lights. And when those lights went out, he had to face a truth every prodigy eventually learns. It's easy to be loved when you're winning. It's much harder to be understood when you're lost. Today, Johnny doesn't talk like a quarterback anymore. He talks like someone who's finally learned to breathe. He still goes to games sometimes, still takes pictures with fans, but there's a quietness in him now, a kind of peace that doesn't need noise. He once said, "I thought football would save me, but it was never supposed to." And maybe that's the lesson, that greatness without grounding eventually collapses under its own weight. That you can be the most talented person in the world, but if you never learn who you are beyond the applause, the moment the cheering stops, you vanish with it. Johnny Manziel didn't just fall from grace. He fell into reality, into the hard, messy process of being human. And in a strange way, that's what made him relatable again. Because beneath all the headlines and the highlight reels was just a kid who wanted to matter. The boy from Kerrville who turned chaos into magic. The man who turned fame into a lesson. And maybe the legend who finally found peace not by being Johnny Football, but by finally becoming Johnny Manziel.